My name is Phil Toland, and today I'm going to be talking about building a great Elixir team. And this is basically an adoption talk, but it's a little bit different from the usual adoption talk. Usually, people are going into an organization that's not using Elixir, and the question is, how do we convince them to use Elixir? In this case, we knew we were going to use Elixir. It was an Elixir organization. It seemed like the right tool for the job, but there were a lot of other decisions that were involved in that to make that team successful. So I want to talk about, just broaden the scope a little bit and talk about some of those other things that go into making a successful team beyond just the technology. So to get started, let's talk a little bit about who I am, so you know why you should listen to me, or not, as the case may be. So first of all, I live in New Mexico. I used to live in Austin, and when I moved to New Mexico and I would meet people who were from there, they would say, like, why would you move here from Austin, right? Like, this is just inconceivable. Well, if any of you have stepped outside today, that's one of the reasons, right? Right now it is 60 degrees and 30% humidity in Albuquerque. So I thought that was a pretty good reason. The other thing is, I'm a big hockey fan, go Avalanche. If you have an hour or two you want to, you don't have anything else to do with, just catch me in the hall and ask me, you know, like, what do you think the Avs' chances are this year? You won't regret it, I promise. So I've been a software developer since the mid-90s, which is kind of a scary long time ago now. But if any of you were in software development back then, those were the days of like 90% of projects failing, everything was waterfall. This was before Agile was even a thing. And it was a pretty traumatic experience, quite frankly. I worked on way too many projects where we were just not set up to succeed. And as a result, for a long time, I've been very interested in this idea of how do we build teams in a way that they can succeed. And I think we've been successful. Mike there is on my team as well, so he can tell you afterwards, say, you know, is that guy full of it or not? I'm sure he'll be more than willing to tell you. The other thing is, I've been an Erlang developer since about 2007. I was very fortunate to be able to get into that area and pretty much stay there. And then since about 2017, I've been working with Elixir and really enjoying that. I was working for a startup when the pandemic happened, and they folded. It turns out that the founder was using investment income to fund the company, and when the stock market took a dip, it was bad news for all of us. We had these Thursday morning calls, because we were all distributed, and we get on the call one Thursday morning, and he's like, well, guys, it's been a great run, but that's it. Monday's everybody's last day. Oh boy, not the kind of meeting you want to have. But fortunately, I landed at PepsiCo eCommerce in June, and that, I think, has been a pretty decent thing. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Currently at PepsiCo, I oversee 2 teams, 2 squads, however you want to say it, with about 3 major projects. So I've had quite a bit of time to think about the things I'm going to talk about today. And I'm really passionate about teams and culture. Because of my role, I don't get to write code as much anymore, although it's still something that I really enjoy. But my passion as a leader is figuring out how to create the culture that makes people want to come to work in the morning. So let's talk about building teams. I think it's important to approach building teams with the same care that we use when building software. When we build a software product, we have we're very intentional about it. We follow a methodology or a process. And I think when we build a team and a team culture, that we should approach it with that same sense of rigor and intentionality. And I often say, I build the team, they build the product. And I think it really helps me to have that mindset of this team is something that I'm building, as if I was building a web app or whatever. So today I'm going to present a case study of building a team. And I hope that at the end of this, that each of you has learned something that you can take back to your own team and make it a little bit better. So I'm particularly interested in this intersection of culture, technology, and process. And by culture, I mean the values, decisions, and actions that we take every day. Technology, of course, is our tech stack, which for most of us here is going to be Elixir. And if it's not Elixir, this is going to be a good argument for you to adopt Elixir. But in processes are ways of working, right? Like the meetings, the ways that we interact with each other. And we should always be asking these questions, right? Does our process and our tech stack should be built on the foundation of our culture, those values that we have, and ask ourselves, does the process respect our values, right? Does the technology work with the process, work the way that we want to work? And if you don't ask those questions, you can create a team where it's kind of miserable to work, and I'm sure everybody's worked on one of those teams. We want to find a situation where those three things are in balance. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of the first project that we worked on. I'm not going to go too much in depth because, quite frankly, the details of the project aren't super important. It was an internal application. It was mostly going to be used by people within PepsiCo. But I suppose this is one of those situations where the phrase big data is actually appropriate. Of course, being at PepsiCo, we have a ton of consumer propensity data, and we have data scientists who spend a lot of time figuring out how to tease meaning out of that data. And that's basically the group that I'm in. That's what we do. We have data scientists, data engineers, and application engineers, and we all work together to create a consistent product from the bottom step of analysis all the way up through the end user. And when I joined the company, they didn't have that application development capability yet. So that was my first task. We need to build this capability of putting user interfaces on top of this big data analysis. So there was a manual process where people would fill out a form and send it to a team who would then annotate it and send it to data science. Data science would send them the results in an Excel spreadsheet. They would take those results, paste them into a PowerPoint. Is this sounding familiar, right? Then they would send the PowerPoint on to the business user, and we're trying to automate all of that so that they can just go into a web app, plug in the information that they want, and get back the results that they're looking for without all the rigmarole. Of course, we have to figure out how to insert PowerPoint and Excel in there because this is a corporate application. But we want to minimize the use of PowerPoint and Excel to the roles in which they are useful. So quite a lot of the data science and data engineering work had already been done when I started. And there was an existing UI prototype that was built in Elixir and Phoenix, but it was included in a larger code base because that was just the easiest way to get it bootstrapped. So one of the first things I had to do was pull that code out into a separate repo and then start building a new application on top of that. For those of you who are interested, the photo here is an abbey, a medieval abbey in Soissons, France. I imagine that was quite a project to put that up, so I thought it was appropriate. So this is a rough timeline of the way things went down. I joined in June of 2020. There was sort of requirements and UI UX design going on. I was extracting the code from that larger application. And then late summer, August-ish, we start recruiting. Our designers sort of finishing up the final UI designs. We hired 2 developers in September, but there was a 3-week lead time before they joined the team. So they're both joining the team in sort of mid-October. And then by the end of the year, by the end of last year, the UI work was done. The problem was that the data engineering and data science infrastructure that we were relying on was not. As we start integrating with this stuff, we find out that data scientists are data scientists. They're not software engineers. And so we had to fill the gap there and step in and clean up a lot of those things and work on those coordination, back-end automation. But by spring of this year, we were sort of into that feature cycle where, you know, the users are coming to us with bugs and new feature requests, and, you know, we're sort of getting into that nice little groove. And at that point, we added 2 new developers on this particular project, and then began looking at what the next big thing was. So this is sort of the context for the stuff I'm going to say next. So I want to start off by talking a bit about culture. So culture is one of these things that we talk about a lot on software teams, and it seems to be there's a lot of confusion about how to build culture, right? People always say, we want a good culture. Okay, great, but it's not as simple as just hiring a bunch of nice people and putting them in a room together. Culture requires being grown like a plant, right? You got to feed it, you got to fertilize it. And more importantly, you got to make sure everyone agrees on what we're working towards. What is the culture that we want? It's one thing to say we want a good culture, but what is a good culture, right? In fact, what does culture even mean? Well, I'll tell you how we defined it. So culture is creating an environment of trust and safety where creativity can flourish. That's what we want. We want people to feel safe when they come into work, to make mistakes, to express their opinion, to, you know, break outside of the box. And that's the thing that we have to be intentional about in order to create it. And I like to say culture is defined in the moment by each individual decision and interaction. That's what culture is. It's the way we treat each other. It's the decisions that we make. It's the values that we as a team hold and the values that guide our decision making. So it's fine to say that, right? Great, that's wonderful. How do we get there? What do we do to get there? Well, the first step is setting expectations early. So I put together a slide deck of sort of my expectation for the team, and I sat down with each of the developers when they started, showed them that slide deck and said, this is what I expect, and this is what you can expect from me. And it's a simple thing. It was a 30-minute conversation, but setting those expectations early makes a big difference. It gives people sort of a framing, a context to think about the way they interact with other people. And there's no awkwardness of, well, I was expecting this, why didn't you do it? And to this day, I have the same discussion with everyone who joins the team. The other thing is we have a clear set of guiding principles for our team. And you might say, well, what are guiding principles? Well, guiding principles are just us sitting down and writing down those values that I mentioned earlier. These are the things that make our team ours. These are the things that we really value. And so this is what our team wiki says about it. Our guiding principles provide a roadmap to build the culture that we want. So when we have to make a hard decision, we fall back on those guiding principles. So, and the other interesting thing here is that these guiding principles give us a vocabulary to talk about the behaviors and the values that we want to see. So when we say, when somebody comes to me and they say, we're having an issue, how do we solve this? What are our guiding principles? What values do we need to rely on in order to make this decision? So here are the guiding principles that we have, and that's kind of small, I apologize, but I tried to fit them all in one slide. We're one team. Learn rapidly. You'll notice that a lot of these are based very heavily on the lean principles. That's not an accident. Results matter. Done is better than perfect. Be accountable. Quality and excellence. Constantly improve. Empathy and innovation. Trust and respect. Be the leader. Assume positive intent. And fill the gap. And these are the things that, to me, when we sit down and we talk about what I expect from our team members, this is what I expect, right? Learn rapidly, get better, deliver results, be accountable for what you're doing. Remember that we're one team, and fill the gap. And I think assume positive intent is actually a really big one, right? It is really easy to think, those other guys, man, they don't know what they're doing. But really, they're probably in the same situation we are. They're doing the best they can with the information that they have, and it helps to be patient. So I tell you, there's a moment that comes with the team when I hear somebody say, I think I'm going to fill the gap on this. And that's where I'm like, yes, We did it. We're there. The other thing that sort of feeds into this culture is the It's Okay To list. And this is something I borrowed from an article in Harvard Business Review that I thought was really great. And part of the guiding principles is writing down those things that we value so we can go back and refer to that list and we have this vocabulary to talk about it. The It's Okay To list is something very similar. It's all of those things that we want the team to feel comfortable doing, but we're making it explicit, right? And I tell everyone who joins the team, like, you are empowered. And I get a question a lot like, what does that even mean, right? That's great, but what does that mean? Well, this is one way we answer that question. It's like, go look at the It's Okay To list. You can do anything that's on there. No questions asked. So these are some of the things that we have on the It's Okay To list, right? It's okay to have a bad or unproductive day. It happens to all of us. Don't beat yourself up over it. It's okay to reach out for help if you're stuck, because after all, we're one team. It's okay to block distractions during focused work, right? Nobody's going to yell at you if you don't answer a Slack message for an hour or 2 hours or however long. It's okay to be wrong, even really wrong, right? This is sort of a mutual disarmament process here, right? I'm not going to yell at you if you're wrong, and you're not going to yell at me if I'm wrong, and we're all going to get along and be happy, and there's going to be rainbows and unicorns and ice cream afterwards. It's okay to punt things until later, right? We don't have to make every decision right now. It's okay to figure out what you want to work on. If the top task in the up next column is something that you don't feel comfortable with, take the next one. It's okay. It's okay to disagree. We're software developers, right? We never disagree. But if it were to happen, that would be okay. And it's okay to socialize, especially in an environment where we're all working remotely. There's this mindset that can creep in that if we're having a conversation, we need to be focused. It's about business, get things done. But we also need to be okay every once in a while stepping back and saying, you know what? Let's talk about, hockey, or whatever. I'm sure there are other things people are interested in. So that's the culture part, right? And I talked about a couple of different ways in which we build the culture. I think the important thing to take away from this is that you're intentional about building your culture, that you document your values, that you document the ways in which you create your culture. The next thing I want to talk about is process. I don't know why I chose the Eiffel Tower for that one. I'm sure there was a complicated process to putting that thing together. So the core of our process is lean software development. So the interesting thing about lean is that it's really not something you do. If anyone says, we do lean, I give you permission to tell them that they're full of it, right? Lean is a set of principles. It's a set of values. Lean is something you are. It's not something you do. You can say our process is lean, and ours is. And so for those of you who aren't aware, so there are 7 lean principles. The first one is eliminate waste. This seems obvious, but what I found is everyone sort of has their thing that they think is super, super necessary that we have to do that nobody else is convinced of. And we never get rid of those things, right? I always say that if you are not uncomfortable with eliminating something, then you haven't cut enough yet. You have to cut till you're uncomfortable. And the amazing thing is, 9 times out of 10, when you cut that meeting or that artifact or that deliverable that you think is absolutely necessary, it's not. So that is the first one, eliminate waste. The next one is amplify learning. I think this is a big one, right? We should always be learning. I'm okay with people making mistakes because most of the time, the team ends up better afterwards. The next one, decide as late as possible. This is a big one. Most of the decisions we make too early. Mary and Tom Poppendick, who wrote the book about lean software development, say that you should decide at the last responsible moment. There is a moment in software development where if you delay that decision any longer, it's bad, right? Decide right before that. The next one is deliver as fast as possible. I don't think I need to convince anyone here that this is important. Hopefully not, If so, meet me afterwards in the hall. But delivering as fast as possible is what makes deciding as late as possible possible. Because that quick delivery cycle means that we can put off decisions, and if we make a mistake or we decide wrong, it's okay, because we can push out another release just like that, right? So these two are really, they are really interdependent. The next one is empower the team. The people who are closest to the work being done should be making the important decisions. And that, to me, that is not something that always, that business stakeholders are always comfortable with, but this is really important. Build integrity in. So integrity is, it's not quite quality, right? It's not like quite bug-free. Integrity is a software system that is high quality, fit for purpose, and easily maintainable, right? So when we talk about integrity, it's bigger than just quality. It is all of the things that we think of that we want a software system to be when we deliver it. And the last one is see the whole. This one means don't optimize a piece of your system in a way that is detrimental to the whole system. When you think about like our application, we've got an Elixir app on the front end, we've got some SQS queues, we've got some S3 buckets, we've got some Airflow DAGs, and it would be really easy to like zero in on one piece of that and optimize it until it is just as fast or as efficient as possible and throws the rest of the system into chaos, right? You should always look at the whole system. And there's something that's kind of magic that happens when you integrate these principles into your work. One thing is you start focusing on flow, right? We want to sort of create this feature production pipeline where work starts at one end as a request and comes out the other end as running tested code. And it needs to flow through there as smoothly, as quickly, and as effortlessly as possible. And when that happens, developers love coming to work. It is great. It is a great feeling. It allows you to find a sustainable pace and keep it up indefinitely. It allows you to measure your capacity and throughput in a way that's meaningful. And it gives you a sort of platform that you can build on to always keep moving and to never stop learning. And I think that is probably my thoughts on software development boiled down to one sentence. Always keep moving, never stop learning. So our process, our ways of working, like I said, we build it like we build our software. So we started out with the simplest thing that could possibly work, right? All of those extra columns, all of those extra steps, the extra sign-offs, the requirements traceability, all that stuff, you ain't gonna need it. So we started out with a Kanban board with 4 columns on it. Up next, in progress, in review, done. That's it. This is the setup we've been using since day one. And I always said, when we need another column, we'll add it. And we never needed it. I think it's hilarious that when I took the screenshot, in review was over the WIP limit, because it's never over the WIP limit. And it just so happens like the one day I take the screenshot, it's over. And Mike pointed it out, and I briefly considered taking another screenshot, and I was like, nah, I'm gonna leave it in. So we have a very simple Kanban board. We have team and project stand-ups daily and retros every other week. We have a process improvement meeting with the whole team every other week. And we have a wiki page that we treat as a backlog for our process improvement and retrospective. So when somebody says, wait a minute, what actually are our expectations for a PR review? Put it in the backlog, we'll talk about it in the next meeting. Otherwise, our Slack channel gets chaotic. So I'm going to talk about metrics briefly. So I gather metrics once a month from Jira, and I track them in Excel. And there's just 4 metrics that I'm interested in. We don't do planning poker, we don't do sprints, we don't do any of that. So to measure our capacity, I look at total tasks completed and tasks completed per developer. And that gives me a rough idea for the month of what our capacity is. And then in terms of making estimates, right? So people do occasionally ask me, how long is this going to take? And I want to tell them it's going to be done when it's done. Unfortunately, they don't like that. So I track the average cycle time and the median cycle time. And the cycle time is just the amount of time that a task is either in the in progress or in review columns. And you might say, why would you need the average and the median? Well, let me tell you. Because what happens is, every once in a while, a big rock comes through that drags the average up. And by looking at the difference between the average and the median, I can get a better feeling for how the team's really performing, right? So if we have a big task that comes in and takes 2 weeks to complete for some reason, Mike's grinning. So for some reason, something comes in and takes a long time like that, that's going to drag your average up, right? And I typically use the average when we're making estimates for our business stakeholders. But the median is probably closer to what the team can actually do. So for this year, we have 4 developers. They do about 37 tasks per month, average 4-day cycle time, median time 2 days. So when somebody comes along and says, we have a new feature we want you to do, here's the mock-ups for it, how long is this going to take? We do a feature breakdown where we break those mock-ups down into tasks. And we're pretty good about getting the task about the right size. I mean, people say, well, wouldn't it be easier to do planning poker? I don't think so, right? Like, you're estimating either way, whether you're sort of estimating whether the task is going to be the right size or you're putting a number on it. Either way, you're doing the estimate. And planning poker just takes a while. And, you know, when you have a small team, you've usually got one person who's going to be really vocal about their estimates, and then everybody else is going to say what he said. And then that's not helpful, right? You might as well just have that guy sit down and write all the estimates himself. So this, I think, works out better for us. We've gotten pretty good about sizing the tasks. And then if one starts to run long, we just break it up, right? Break it down. You've reached a good stopping point. Great, we'll call this one done, create another ticket for the next part. And so we can break those down into, we can do the feature breakdown. We look and say, okay, this is 30 tasks times 4 days, 120 work days. Add some on because stuff happens. And now we've got an estimate we can go to the business with that we're fairly confident about, but we haven't spent a ton of time getting to that point. The other thing that I don't like about planning poker is that it tends to give the impression of more precision than is really there, right? More precise, but not more accurate is not better. So I feel like having a very rough estimate is very useful because we don't give the impression that we know more than we do. So with that, let's talk about technology, right? This is what we're all here for. So Elixir was always going to be the foundation for our tech stack. And very early on, as I'm getting ready to hire developers, we have this question, do we want to do a SPA? Do we want to do server-side rendered? And here's the thing, we're building an internal application. We don't know how much the team is going to be allowed to grow. We're starting with 2 open headcount. Do you really want to hire 1 JavaScript developer and 1 Elixir developer? That seemed really risky to me, right? Because what happens if your JavaScript developer is out sick and you find a bug? I mean, hopefully your Elixir developer can fill the gap on that one. But I like the idea of having a team where the developers are fungible, right? If something's broken over here, we just find the guy who's got some time and he goes and works on it, or gal. So and I know what you're thinking, right? Which is, but there's a third option. I'm getting there. So I decided, let's start with 2 full-stack developers, right? 2 developers that can work top to bottom. That way we've got fungible developers, we've got a higher bus number. This is better for everything. And of course, live view, right? So the app was originally all server-side rendered. And then as the developers came on board, as we started to get more comfortable with what the app was supposed to do, who was going to be working on it, those sorts of things, then we start converting to live view. Let's do a little experiment. Let's see how it works. Okay, we're going to do this on one view. That worked out great. Now we're going to do it on another view. And we just keep going. And today, the app is, I think, all live view. Mike's nodding. It's all live view. Did I mention I don't code much anymore? So live view not only solved this SPA versus server-side rendered dilemma for us, it also was a huge boon for us being a small team, because the developers were able to stay in the same language and focus more on delivering value than on the technical details of the architecture, right? And I think this is really important to keep in mind for a small team. And we're very pragmatic, right? I feel like this is probably one of the best things that a small team can do. I don't know why I chose Vegas for being pragmatic. Maybe because it's like the opposite. So like, the Paris is maybe not pragmatic. I don't know. But some examples is like we went with Bootstrap at first. Well, I should say I went with Bootstrap at first before the other developers came on board, because I'm like, I have a limited amount of time. I'm dealing with all the stakeholders. We need to get something in front of them. Bootstrap is the path of least resistance, so that's what we did. Once we had more developers on the team, once they were able to get ahead of the curve a little bit, we ended up moving to an Alpine Tailwind stack, because honestly, I think it's just better. It's lighter. It doesn't have some of the gnarly dependencies that Bootstrap has. And also, I'm not sure how much this should go into the decision making, but Bootstrap's not like really popular, and we wanted to be in the cool kids club, so we went pedal, right? But that's the kind of pragmatism we're talking about, like being focused on using the technology in a way that moves us forward, and being willing to, get out in front of things a little bit. And I summarize this, as I said earlier, as be curious, stay agile, and keep moving. We keep exploring new technologies and approaches. As an example, we recently started using Vega Lite and NX for some of our graphing. And we tried it out on some isolated graphs in a new part of the application. If it works out, great. We can replace the old code incrementally. If not, well, it's one screen in a new part of the app. We can rewrite that easily enough. And it's okay to fail, right? Like sometimes these explorations don't work out. Early on, we decided as a team to adopt Surface, and then when it looked like Live View was sort of moving closer to Surface's functionality, we backed off a bit, and it's like, okay, let's let the dust settle here and see what happens. But we learned a lot about structuring live views when we were doing that, and I think the team is much better for having had that experience, for experimenting a little bit. There was a developer who had to spend some time rolling that stuff out, but I feel like it was very much worth the cost. So the key takeaways from all of this, I would say the first one is lead intentionally. And I know some people are going to say that, and it's like, I'm not a manager. What does this mean to me? Honestly, everyone on the team has the opportunity to lead. Whether you are like the expert in a particular area of the code, whether you know more about a particular technology, whether you've worked with the business longer and understand the business domain, everyone has the opportunity to lead in some way. And I think it's important that we're intentional about that, right? Not just, oh, hey, here I am in this position of influence, and, this seems cool to me, right? Think about those decisions. And this goes back to what I said earlier about being explicit about the culture that you want to create. But I think it also plays into the way we make decisions. Sometimes it's easy to fall back on defaults. And if it's not an important decision, that's fine, right? But for the important stuff, let's think about it. Let's think about the impacts, the consequences of the decision we're about to make. And, and of course, for the unimportant stuff, don't spin your wheels, right? Like, fall back on the default. Who cares? Most of the time, having a decision is better than, or even if it's a bad decision, it's better than not having a decision, right? You need to be able to move forward. You need to be able to learn. And everyone needs to understand and agree on the team's mission. And this goes back to that intentionality. Don't assume that everybody's on the same page as you are. We're all software developers. We've all sat with our business users, and they've all told us, like, we're all absolutely on the same page. And then you talk to them individually, and they are absolutely not. So let's not do that with our teams, right? Let's make sure everyone knows why we are coming in, what we're doing, and what we value. So this is going to sound super corporate, but a little while back, we sat down and put together a mission statement for our team. Like I said, I've got 2 squads, we're working with different tech stacks, working with different parts of the business, and we realized that we needed to have something that we could point to that said, this is what we're about. And I want you to notice that it doesn't say anything about software development, because we are in the business of solving problems, right? And it's also sort of really tailored to the problems that we experience that we are trying to solve within the business. So, I don't know if I mentioned it, but I work for PepsiCo. It's kind of a big company. It's been around a little while. And in that situation, silos tend to come up, right? And we have to really break down those barriers in order to do our jobs effectively. And so that's why our mission statement says we develop, refine, and evangelize sustainable ways of working that transcend boundaries throughout the global organization. We didn't put that in there to sound good. We put that in because that is one of the core things that we have to do to be successful. And making sure that everyone from our stakeholders to our coworkers to our teammates understand that that's what we're doing when we come in the morning has been a really good thing for the team. And when we put this together, we got the team together, took a lot of feedback, took a lot of ideas. We got together with our key stakeholders. We workshopped this a lot, and then I sat down with my leadership team, and we came up with the final version. And having that input from our stakeholders, from our team members, was a really sort of, I don't know, I can't think of a better word than bonding type experience, right? Like it gave everyone a sort of single frame of reference and put us all on the same page. And yeah, I also felt icky about, like, we're making a mission statement, but it turned out to be much more meaningful than I thought. The other thing is making the right call at the right time. The right decision always depends on context. And, you know, LiveView could have turned out to not be the right answer for us if it was less mature or if our domain was a little bit different. But it was the right decision at that right time, you know, and what I mentioned earlier about Bootstrap, right? That was the right decision in that moment. A few months later, it wasn't the right decision, and we corrected. And that's okay. You don't want to make your decisions too early. You don't want to make them too late. And you want to make sure that you're taking the context into consideration when you make those decisions. I remember hearing years ago, and I can't find corroboration for this, but somebody told me that in the early days, the IETF's unofficial motto was rough consensus and running code. And I love that so much, and I still use it, right? Like, look, we're never going to agree on everything. We're software developers. But if we can, like, get all into the same ballpark and just, you know, make something work, that's a victory. That's a win in my book. And then build the team for the long term. We build our software knowing that at some point in the future, we're going to have more users. We're going to have more traffic. We're going to have more data. So, you know, we don't want to start out with, you know, we're going to build something that is, you know, can handle billions of records if we don't have a record yet. But we want to make sure that the app can grow, right? Like that we have that we're not going to have to rewrite it if we need to scale, that sort of thing. And I think we want to build the team the same way. And so, again, we approach it like we approach software. So we make changes incrementally. We don't make big changes to our ways of working. If we come up with something, if 2 people come up with a problem that they have in one of our process improvement meetings, it's like, okay, let's vote on the one we're going to address this time, and we'll address the next one next time. Make those changes incrementally. Ensure each change is meaningful, right? If we do something, we want to make sure it moves the needle for us. So before we make the change, we have the conversation, how will we know if this is successful? Test after each change, right? So we make the change. When we come back together in 2 weeks' time, we say, did that work out? And if the answer is no, we stop doing it. I know, right? It's crazy. So we test after each change, and then we drop the stuff that doesn't work. Lather, rinse, repeat, right? So we, just like we incrementally build our software, we incrementally build our team, we incrementally build our process. And that's created a team that has been able to scale very nicely. So remember earlier when I was talking about the timeline, and I said that we were hiring and we had our new developer starting in mid-October. I think it's basically exactly a year ago today that the first developer other than me joined the team. And this is what the team looks like today. And this is, there are a lot of people smiling here, which as the manager makes me feel good, right? We've been able to scale pretty well, and today we work on 3 major projects. There are 2 squads here. And just in case anyone was thinking that I was making the argument that Elixir was the only way to do this well, half of our team uses Python and JavaScript and has a SPA. But it was the right decision for them in the context that they were working in. So that is the end of my presentation. If you want to go in depth in any of this, please just find me in the hallway. I can talk, right? So, and I really enjoy talking about this. I will talk about my team until you run away. Hopefully not, but you know, it's been known to happen. Thank you.